If you have not put in your name in the chat bar and said here, or I'm here, please do so. I see Catherine and Anna, Jamari, Hannah, Caitlin, Ava, and Morgan have done so, but there are more of you in here. So make sure you put in your name and say you're here in the chat box. Tiffany, I see yours. Very good. Xander, I need you to put yours in also. There you go. This is where we are. We're in, let me turn down my phone. Okay. We're working in development, but this week is the memory section. We'll finish up the development and start memories on Thursday. So we won't finish development today. We should get to around 60, slide number 60, I think. Are there any questions about anything that's going on in the class? Thank you, Anaya, for putting in that you're here. Quinn, make sure that you put in that you're here on the chat. If there are no questions, then I will continue with the lecture for lifespan development. All right, let me bring up that share. This is where we ended lifespan development at the end of the psychosexual stages when we were talking about Freud's psychosexual stages. And the next one I didn't start, even though it was, I could have started it, but cognitive development, which is very important. It's Piaget is his name, the man's name, and he talks about how children develop their mental capabilities. We don't all have the same mental capabilities when we're born as we do when we're adults. Well, how do we develop into the adult stage, and what different aspects are there that we can describe about certain stages? Now, Piaget was born in 1896 and died in 1980, and he developed this theory to explain the cognitive development of children by studying his own 3 children. Not a good idea. You should not study people you know. There's a heck of a lot of bias in it, and for your children, oh my gosh, of course there's a tremendous amount of bias there. But his theory was then tested, what he developed with his children was tested on thousands and thousands of other children, and it turns out that he was fairly accurate in his description of how we develop our cognitive abilities. Some of the terms that he used include schemes, assimilation, accommodation, mental representations, object permanence, and the 4 stages of development, and we will talk about all of these. So schemes are the way we define our world. The mental structures are programs that guide our developing child's thoughts, and we maintain those schemes throughout our life. Some schemes are very narrow, some schemes are very broad, as we'll see as we go along in this section. Mental representations are the ability to think about things in our head, but we'll see in the memory section, children do not have memory bins in their working memory. They can't form mental representations of anything yet because there's no way for them to hold the information. When the first memory bin in working memory is developed, they can then now hold one thought at a time, one idea at a time, one representation of their favorite ball at a time. Until that point, the favorite ball does not exist until they see the ball. When they see the ball, then they can remember or think about the things about that particular ball. But there's no working memory at that point. When they get the working memory and they have that one thing, now they know that the ball exists even when it isn't in sight. But if you want to compare that ball to something else, they can't, because they only have one bin, and you need 2 bins to compare one to the other. So you have to have 2. you think you have one, it's holding the information in your brain, and then you're thinking about all the different things that you might have in your brain, and oh, that one matches. Now we have a match. So mental representation is the ability to form mental images of objects and events. According to Piaget, there are two basic processes that are involved in cognitive development, and they are assimilation and accommodation, and they both are based around how narrow or how broad your schemes are. So assimilation is what happens when you have a broad scheme. And I'll use this as an example. I want you guys to type in the chat bar your definition of an airplane. What is an airplane? Describe it, not only what it is, how it works, but what is an airplane? Dun, 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 da, 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 da. Somebody's got to have an idea what an airplane is. A big metal thing that can take people far distances fast. Ooh, I like that. Large flying method of transportation. Flying vehicle, okay. A metal, well, there's a structural metal machine with wings that flies in the air for transportation. I like that, Morgan. You got a metal and you have wings on it. Where are the wings on it's like a metal tube, right? And wings on either side. Is that correct? Do I get you? Do you agree with that? Yes. Okay. Now the engines on it, what kind of engines are they? A metal tube that flies through the air, the sky, can be transportation or a death trap. Yes, it can. What about the engines? What kind of engines does it have? Come on, you guys gotta have, it's actually part of the name of the airplane today. It's called a jet. Airplanes have jet engines, right? So my description would be a metal tube with wings on both sides, jet engines, one on each wing, and ailerons. It's got a back one. It's got little tiny wings on the back, right? Does that match your description of an airplane? Anna says yes. The rest of you don't think? Okay, we're getting yeses. That describes an airplane. Okay, so we live in North Carolina, which is the state of the Union, which is the beginning of manned flight. And their airplane, it is an airplane, their airplane was made out of wood, not metal, had bi-wings on top of each other, and had a propeller, not a jet engine. Thank you, Jacob, for writing in. So it doesn't fit my description, does it? But the schema of our idea of what an airplane is, oh yeah, well sure, that's okay, we can fit that right into it. And so we can assimilate the idea of the Wright brothers plane into our scheme of what an airplane is. Does anybody have any issue with that? You all, that's good, right? You can actually use that description of an airplane. It fits your scheme of what an airplane is, right? Because the original one that was Quinn, a big metal thing that could take people far distances. That still said metal, but Catherine said large flying method of transportation. Well, it transported one person, and when we're talking about the Wright brothers, it only transported one person, but it was a means of getting from one place to another. If you've ever been to the Wright Memorial, they did not fly very far. That's assimilation. Now, for accommodation, it requires a restructuring of your scheme because your scheme is so narrowly focused. And my favorite to use is a UFO. If I ask my students, do you believe in UFOs? Most of them are going to say, no. And if I ask them why, it's because they don't believe in alien beings that live out in the universe that have spaceships that want to visit the Earth. That just, no, it's fantasy. We don't believe in UFOs. But a UFO, sorry to burst your bubble, means unidentified flying object. And there are plenty of unidentified flying objects in our world. I had one the other day that went flying by my eyes, and I was like, what was that? I have no idea what that was, but it was an unidentified flying object. Scared me. I can look up in the sky and see planes that I know it's a plane, but I don't know what kind of plane it is, or even really if it's in the distance, is that really a plane or is it something else that's way out there in the distance? So there are lots of unidentified flying objects. There's no A in there meaning alien. There's no unidentified alien flying object. That's not what it says. It says unidentified flying object. So because the scheme for UFO is so narrowed by the word alien, you have to crack that scheme open to let in all these other things that are flying through the air that you have no idea what it is, because they all fit the description of unidentified flying object. And that's what accommodation does. Children tend to have very, very broad schemes on many things, and they can fit almost anything into them. Eventually, they break their schemes up into smaller pieces, like a bird and a plane are the same thing to a child because they're both flying, so they must be the same. And then we eventually learn there's different schemes to identify flying animals as opposed to flying things that humans made, and they both fit into giant scheme of flying things. So we as adults tend to have a lot of narrow ones that we make that we have to crack apart sometimes to be able to fit, and that's accommodation. That's what accommodation is. So that's a difference between assimilation and accommodation. Thanks, Lauren, for putting that you're here. Object permanence is the knowledge that an object unseen still exists. You have to have some memory in order to be able to remember that object and then think about it even though it's not in front of you. So that's part of mental representations and having an object permanence. There's a certain point in life where children can recognize things that are not in their sight and they can go off and look for it. Mental operations is when you can manipulate objects in your mind, in memory. Remember, you have to have two different bins to be able to manipulate two different things, but you have to have three in order to manipulate three things, four in order to manipulate four things, and we as adults have about 7, plus or minus 2, 5 to 9 memory bins as an adult is what we have. Some people have more, some people have less, 5 to 9. Remember, everything is a spectrum in development of a human being. We are not all alike. Egocentrism is the inability to see another person's point of view. Then children do not have that to begin with. They don't even know that there is another thought other than their own thoughts. They think that you think the same way they think. And if you ask a child something like their name, they're like, well, you know my name. I know my name, so you must know my name. And that's egocentrism, concentrating on oneself and not understanding that there are other minds out there. And when they do finally figure out there are other minds, that's called the theory of mind. The awareness that other people's behaviors, their likes and dislikes may be influenced by their beliefs and desires and emotions that are not like your own beliefs, desires, and emotions. And that occurs sometime around 5 years of age. But a child who has an older sibling will learn it faster because they will recognize that the desires, beliefs, and emotions of that older sibling do not take theirs into account. And they connect that information easier and faster. There's a great experiment that Piaget did called the bad monkey experiment. You ask the moms for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds what is their favorite candy and what candy don't they like at all. And then you bring the child into the laboratory and there's a puppet on one side of the table and they're sitting on the other side of the table, and in front of them there are two piles of candy. And one, their favorite candy, the other one, the one they don't like so much. And the monkey's talking to them, having a good time with them, and the monkey says to them, "What's your favorite candy?" And they tell them what their favorite candy is, the 3-year-olds. And the monkey says, "Me too," and snags up all of the candy that's the good candy, so that the child is left with the not so great candy. And the person will come in and replenish the piles, and the monkey will continue to talk to the 3-year-olds and ask them again, "What's your favorite candy?" And the 3-year-olds will tell them what their favorite candy is. The monkey says, "Me too," and takes all their favorite candy. 3-year-olds never get their favorite candy. 4-year-olds will, sometimes they will, it's inconsistent. They'll get their favorite candy sometimes, but because they'll lie about the other one, say, "No, that one's my favorite, nasty one." The monkey goes, "Me too," and grabs the nasty. But it's inconsistent. 5-year-olds, they will lose their favorite candy one time and never lose it again. They will always tell the monkey, "It's the nasty candy. That's the candy I like." Monkey says, "Me too," grabs the nasty candy, and they're left with their favorite candy. 5-year-olds have learned to lie. The theory of mind. Animism is giving life to inanimate objects, rocks, dolls. They can have a conversation with a Kleenex. Sometimes you wonder. Children are amazing. They think all things, they can animate anything. And they have little tea parties with their dolls sitting around a table with cups of tea, and they're talking to them, having a good time with their animated dolls. And they give their dolls human characteristics. This doll is sad, this doll is happy, this doll is afraid. That's called anthropomorphism, giving human characteristics to non-human things. But we don't have to give the anthropomorphism to inanimate objects. We don't have to animate and anthropomorphize, because cats and dogs are already alive, so we don't have to animate them, but we still give them human characteristics. My cat, I have, out of the 10 cats I have, we have one new baby cat that it just loves the heck out of me. It rubs up against my legs, and it lays in my laps and purrs, and it's just a wonderful cat. It loves me. So I'm in the kitchen, and it's rubbing up against my leg, and I'm telling my wife, "Oh, look, he loves me. He loves me. Basil loves me. Basil, razzle dazzle, Basil. Basil loves me." And then he goes up against the trash can, and he's rubbing up against the trash can the same way he's rubbing up against me. Does he love the trash can? He has a certain behavior that I associate with love. And that's the big trap in animal learning and animal behavior and testing. We have to be very careful not to give a description using human terms to the animal. We give the exact details of what the animal did. We don't say the animal loved us. Well, he may love us, and animals certainly seem to have a connection with other animals and remember much better than we used to think about animals remembering. So it isn't just 2 weeks that an animal remembers something, it's their lifetime they can remember things. And so we give these animals and these non-animated objects, inanimate objects, human feelings. So centration is concentrating on one thing at a time, and even unable to multitask. And children are very centric. They centrate on one thing. And sometimes it's simply because they only have one bin to think about things, but they also have to learn how to use their bins once they've developed too. So you could take a child into the bathroom over and over and over again and say, "We're going to wash our hands. Turn the faucet on. Good. Put your hands under the water. Good. Now rub your hands so they get wet. Good. Pick up the soap. Put the soap on your hands. Put the soap back in the dish. Very good. Now rub your hands some more. Now rinse your hands off with the water. Very good. No more soap. Good. Turn the water off. Now dry your hands off over and over and over and over again. Until finally one day you're busy in the kitchen for getting dinner together and you just can't take them into the bathroom. But hey, you've told them a million times, so go to the bathroom and wash your hands. So they go into the bathroom and they come back out and their hands are dirty. What did you do? I turned the water on and I rubbed my hands on the towel. And the water's still on because they didn't turn it off, right? Because they can't put together all these things. You have to keep doing it over and over and over again until one day they go, Mom, I can do it myself. Okay, now you can back off and watch them to make sure they actually can do it themselves. And they have met a certain level that you have accepted. Now, at first they were unable to do a particular task without your help. Now they can do the task without your help. So what you have to do then is raise the bar to a point where there's a particular task you want them to do that they can't do by themselves but can still do with your help. And eventually they will go, Mom, I can do it myself. And then you raise the bar a little bit more. And that's called scaffolding. And we'll talk about Lev Vygotsky and his ideas of scaffolding later. But it's basically just like a bricklayer. Bricklayers put the bricks up until they can't reach any higher, and then they put up a scaffold so they can get higher, and then they can reach up a certain amount, and then they can't reach any higher, so they put the scaffold a little bit higher. And that's what we're doing with children. You need to scaffold their learning. Conservation is the idea that physical properties of an object do not change when the appearance of the object changes, as long as nothing was added or taken away. Children do not get this idea of conservation. If you take a ball of dough and you show them the ball of dough and then you push the ball of dough out so that it's a nice pizza, because you're teaching them how to make a pizza, and you say, is there a difference between the two? Yeah, oh, absolutely, there's a difference between the two. The pizza has more dough in it because it's taking up more space on the counter than the ball did. They have no idea of volume. They don't get volume. And so there's this idea that they have that there's a change in that object, even though nothing was taken away and nothing was added. And it takes a while for them to get that idea. And I had a student once who was babysitting, and she told me this story that it was lunchtime, and so she asked the child, do you want lunch? Yes, I'm hungry. Would you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Yes. Do you want one or two? I want one. One peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. So they went in the kitchen together, and she puts the peanut butter on one side of the bread. She puts the jelly on the other piece of bread. She puts them together and puts them down on the counter. No. Peanut butter goes on the top, not the bottom. Oh, okay. So she flips it over on top, and she cuts it diagonally. Ow! I only wanted one. I didn't want two. But she says, she's really smart on her feet, fast on her feet. But this one's for you and this one's for me. Oh, well, that's okay then. That's okay then. So children are just a joy to be around. They have so many different things that they see the world so differently. But all of these combine to come up with the saying, you can't teach a pig to sing. If you try to teach a pig to sing, it will frustrate the heck out of you, and it will annoy the pig because pigs can't sing. And you cannot teach a child to do something before his brain is ready for that child to do that particular thing. You will frustrate yourself and annoy the child if you try to teach the child something that they're not prepared, physically prepared to be able to do. And a lot of parents push, and they're anxious. They get anxiety about it, and they're frustrated, and the child is annoyed because they can't do the task. Wait, watch them, keep track of them. You'll be able to tell when they can do a particular task and when they can't, and when they can do a task with your help and when they can't. And when they can do it with your help, then help them over and over and over again until they finally say, Mom, I can do it myself. And that's Piaget's terms, the thought processes that he had. But he put together a whole theory about this. Sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational are the stages. This is a definite stage theory, discrete stage theory that children go through from infancy to adulthood. Again, it stops at adulthood. And we as adults have reached certain stage in our life. So the sensory motor stage is from birth to about 2 years of age. The child relies very heavily on their innate motor skills, the reflex actions, the things that are built into us, and responds to the stimuli in the environment. Their sensory intelligences, their sensory motor intelligences are mental representations. They're at 2 years of age. They know things exist, so they have representations in their head of those things. They have object permanence of that particular thing in their life. And then the pre-operational stage goes from 2 until just about before we go into school, 2 to 6, maybe 7 years of age. Remember, it's a spectrum. Not everybody grows at exactly the same time frame, so you'll be ready or you won't be ready for school. I was not ready for school at 6 years of age, but the law is you're supposed to go to school at 6 years of age. My grandmother told my mom, don't send him to school. He's not ready for school. But my mom sent me to school. I went to 5 different first grades. Now, three of them were because my father was in the Navy and we were moving around, and so I was forced to go to 3 different schools, but I still wasn't ready. And then probably even if I had been ready, going to so many different schools probably would have interrupted something in the transitions, but I was not ready. I went to school. We had rooms where the school room in the back was a closet. There was a door in the way in one side and you come out the other side. We put up all your clothes and you put your lunch boxes in there. I would come in late every single day, always come in late, go in the back, knock everybody's coat off, open the lunch boxes, see if anything was in there that I liked, go sit down on the radiator. I didn't sit in my seat, sat on the radiator, swang from the rope that held up the curtains. I was a monster. I was just a monster. And the teachers my mom says, the teachers were afraid of me. Well, at 7, I went back to first grade because I learned nothing in first grade. So I had to repeat first grade. And I was doing the same things. My mom took me out, put me in a private school. It no longer exists, but it was in Portsmouth. And Bay Lake Pines. It just closed recently. And it was a first grade to 12th grade private school. My daughter's in a private school, first grade to 12th grade. And at 7 years of age in the private school, I was still acting up. So in that school, you did not get detention. You got Saturday school. Your mom and dad had to drive you to school on Saturday and come pick you up after school on Saturday. And everybody that was in detention was in the same room in the cafeteria. And I'm 6, right? I'm 6. And 18-year-olds in detention are hoodlums. I'm 7 years of age, 7. There are hoodlums in the room with me. And I didn't think I was getting out of there alive. And the next day, I paid attention. I came in, sat in my seat, and I paid attention. I changed my behavior. Because there's a part of your brain, the central executive, that controls your ability to function and concentrate and do the tasks that you're supposed to do. And at 6, my central executive was not complete. It hadn't matured all the way. At 7, it had matured. But at 6, I had developed a pattern of behavior that at 7 years of age, I continued that pattern of behavior until something told me, you better not do that anymore. And I was certainly able at that point to control my behaviors. So it's a spectrum how we develop. Some people are slower, some people are faster. In the pre-operational stage, what we find when we talk about Piaget and study Piaget closely is that he was very good at determining these are definite stages that children go through, but he wasn't so good about the time frames that they came. So 2 to 6 or 7 years of age, pre-operational stage, is marked by well-developed mental representations and the use of language, which is a mental representation on its own, language. And the pre-operational intelligences, they're still egocentric. They still are animistic. They give life to inanimate objects at this stage. Anthropomorphic, they still give human characteristics. Heck, adults give this, but we recognize what we're doing if we're told. And then they're centrating. They're still not multitasking. And humans don't multitask well. We are not multitaskers. Yes, you can think about one thing and do another task, but try patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. And that's not really a multitasking thing that we have to do in the world, but it's very difficult. And if your eyes are on your phone and you're in a classroom, you're not going to get half the information that your teacher is saying or wants you to learn, because where your eyes are is where your brain is. And yes, you can hear that person, but it's going in one ear and out the other. It's not, you cannot multitask. It's very, very difficult for humans to multitask. So that is a pre-operational stage. And then the concrete operational stage is about 7 to 11 years of age. The child understands conservation now in certain respects. We understand that things don't change if nothing's been added or taken away, but they're not capable of abstract thinking. And abstract thinking is like algebra. X plus 2 equals Y. Well, if X is 3 plus 2 equals Y, then Y is 5, right? But what if X is 6 and concrete operational, whoa. You just told me what X and Y are. You can't change what X and Y are now, what you told, 2 and 5. That's what X and Y are. If you want to change the formula, then use A and B, not X and Y. Variables, they don't understand the variable concept. And if they have something that's happened to them, they can bring that up in their heads and they can understand that particular event that's happened to them. But their abstract reasoning, what if? If the what if has nothing to do with an experience they had, they can't do what if in concrete operational thinking. So the concrete operational intelligences are conservatism. They understand things don't change unless you add or take something away, and mental operations. They can do really good mental operations at this point if they have experience with that particular thing. Then we come into formal operational thought, and people have said that formal operational thought, again, is a spectrum. You step into formal operational thought, but some people go head and heels into formal operational thought. Others are slightly in and never really complete formal operational thought. So, for instance, we understand algebra, but do you understand also geometry and trigonometry and calculus? I mean, if you want abstract thought, then calculus is abstract. So from about age 12 on, we enter into formal operational stage, and some people will go very deeply into it, and some people will only go shallow into formal operational thought. But abstract thought begins to appear only in 60% of the population. 40% of people remain in concrete operational thought. In other words, there are adults in their 40s and 50s and 60s who think like an 11-year-old. And you cannot argue with these people using what-if statements unless they have had that particular event occur in their life. You can't argue with a concrete operational person the way you argue with a formal operational person. It's fun to argue with debating a formal operational thinker is lots of fun, but you'll get yourself, again, You can't teach a pig to sing, and you will frustrate yourself and annoy the person if you're trying to argue with somebody with concrete operational and you're using formal operational thought. You have to back down into concrete operational thinking in order to argue with somebody who has concrete operational thinking. So the formal operational intelligence is our abstract thought, which is like x plus 2 equals y, the algebras and the trigonometry and calculus. Do y'all get that? Does that make sense? Yeses and yeses. Good, 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 good. Remember, saying yes means you're still here. So I know that you are actually still present when you say yes or no. And that is sort of a symbol to me that tells me that I can actually count you as present because you're still here. Now we leave Piaget and get to Kohlberg. Kohlberg was an interesting man. He studied men. He studied boys, children, boys, and his particular group of people were WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, because that was his college that he went to. He taught at a college that was all male, all white, all middle class to upper class people, and those were the people he studied. And so he actually thought that his theory matched everyone in the world. And Carol Gilligan, one of his students later in life when the school became male and female, she said, no, that's not true. And she went out and she proved that there are different ways of thinking for women also. And of course, we know today, and this is all about your particular cultural essay at the end of the class, cultures are different. Individualistic cultures like ourselves and Asian cultures, which are collectivists, have very different ways of looking at the world. Buddhists have very different ways of looking at the world than Christians and Jews and Arabs. So we have to take into consideration the group that we're studying when we study it. And he was very arrogant about thinking that what he studied was the way it was. But he was born in 1927, died in 1987, and believed that we go through these stages of moral development. The first stage is pre-conventional stage. It has 2 substages, and it's all about yourself. So stage 1, pleasure and pain orientation of infants. They are avoiding pain or avoiding getting caught if they get old enough in that particular stage 1, and obedience and punishment. They understand they have to be obedient or they're going to be punished, which could be the problem with, avoiding pain in certain families. Stage 2, and you should never beat a child, or if you ever hit a child, it should only be one time on the butt as an attention getter because they're not paying attention. Whack. Pay attention. Never, ever beat a child otherwise. And we'll talk about that in another chapter as well. So stage 2, cost-benefit orientation, reciprocity. As you're old enough now to understand, hey, if I'll do this for you if you give me $1. And a lot of parents do this to their children. I'm going to give you $1 if you pick up, for every stick you pick up in the yard, I'll give you 5 cents. So it's a reciprocity thing. Achieve specific rewards and mutual benefits, individualism, and exchange of benefits. The second stage is called the conventional stage. In stage 3, you're trying to be the good child. Your orientation is about your family. You gain acceptance and avoid disapproval. You're trying to avoid the disapproval of your family, specifically your family, and you develop good interpersonal relationships because of this. As you try to develop these connections with your family, you're also learning to develop the connections with the outside world. Stage 4 is law and order orientation. Now it's not about your family. Now it's about the community, your community. Follow the rules of not just your family, the rules of your society to avoid the penalties of society. You want to maintain a social order. But you're very specific about your social order, your society's orders. And then in stage 5, the social contract orientation is about community. It's not just a little group, not just your church, but your whole city, about the community, or maybe your whole country, to promote the welfare of your particular society. But there are other societies out there. This is your society you're thinking about, understanding social contracts and the individual rights within your society. And then in stage 6, the ethical principle about humanity. It's not just about your society, your country, your religion. It's about the world and all of human nature. So achieve justice, be consistent with your own principles, avoid self-condemnation. I don't want to, I understand what the world has, but I also understand what I need as well, and understand that there exist universal principles of truth and justice for all humans. As I said, Carol Gilligan said, you know, men and women think differently, and we do, as much as some people want to yell and scream that we're the same creature. We are not the same creature. We definitely have differences based on our hormones. And Carol Gilligan did the studies. She's still alive today, and she works at New York University. And she added basically the woman's perspective to Kohlberg's theory. Gilligan concluded that women think more about the caring thing to do rather than what the rules allow. And she had a really good experiment that she did with men and women. She brought up men and women into the laboratory alone, individually, and she gave them a scenario and asked what they would do. And the scenario was, you have a child, the child is very sick, there is a drug that will help the child, but the drug costs a fortune, and you only have half of the money needed to buy the drug. It's in the drugstore, but you don't have all the money, and your credit cards are maxed out. There's no way for you to get to pay for this. So you go to the drugstore and you tell the drug, I have half the money I can give you right now, and I'll pay you later the rest of it, but I need this drug for my child. And the drugstore druggist says, no, we can't give it to you unless you pay for the whole thing. What do you do? And women universally said, I'll appeal to his human nature. I will talk to him and I'll make him understand that, you know, this is something that is necessary. Men say, that's fine, I'll just leave. And I'll come back tonight, break in, and steal it. And men think differently than women do. And we have evidence of this outside of the laboratory. We have evidence of this. When Katrina hit New Orleans was flooded, and because the dikes broke and the water rushed in, because New Orleans is actually under sea level. It's below sea level. And they have pumps throughout the city to pump out the water, but the pumps were ancient and they hadn't updated them, and half of them were broken and they didn't work like they were supposed to, even if I don't even think they would have worked anyway, because of the dike. When the dike breaks, there's nothing you can do about it. So it flooded. And there were news people there with cameras rolling to watch the riots that happened, because there's no food, there's no electricity, your house is flooded, what are you going to do? And people were rioting and breaking into stores. And it wasn't that the men and women talked to each other and said, this is what I'm going to go get and this is what you're going to go. They were just breaking into stores. Their base instinct had taken over. And men were coming out of the stores with electronics, VCRs, televisions, radios, whatever they could grab, computers. So they were coming out of the stores with electronics. And the women, those electronics had probably already been underwater. They were useless anyway. There was no electricity. You couldn't do anything with them. Who were you going to sell it to? Nobody had, there was no banks open. There was no money. What were you going to do with electronics? Well, the women were coming out of the stores with clothes and food for their family. Completely different view of life. And men and women are. But so are we in different cultures as well. And that is the new way to approach the world is not only do you say, this is my research, but this is my research in this culture. And this is my research in another culture. And maybe there are connections you can make between those cultures, but many times there's more that are different about the cultures than there are that are the same. Yes, humans are the same in very many ways, and we'll talk about some of that, especially in the emotion chapter. But there are varied differences because of the cultures that you live, grow up in, because you're male, because you're female, and because of your religions, because your families. There's all kinds of things that affect and influence us and change us from one person to a different person. There are other parts of morality and social connections. One of the things that I like to talk about is temperament. There's a book out there that I recommend called Personality Plus, How to Understand Others by Understanding Yourself. It's all about temperaments. And there are 4 temperaments, and these go all the way back to Hippocrates in Greece. And he named these 4. And today we have tests that can test you to see whether you are one of what combination you are. There's no such thing as somebody who's all one temperament or another. You're a combination of the 4 temperaments. And you're born with this. This is what you are when you're born. And it's a very strongly genetic trait. And the book that I mentioned is a very Christian book, but you don't have to pay attention to the Christian part if you're not Christian. It is a really good book about temperaments. Jerome Kagan did research on shyness and gregariousness, outgoing people or shy people. And he determined that babies are born, 15% of us extremely shy, 15% of us extremely outgoing, and the rest of us somewhere in between. Again, a spectrum. Everything's a spectrum. Other research has shown that shyness, no matter how gregarious you are or how shy you are, the shyest you'll ever be in your life is in your teenage years. Socialization is the lifelong process of developing behavior patterns that value, that can conform to your society, and that Kohlberg is a big part of that moral reasoning. And then there's attachment. That's the next thing to talk about, is attachment, and Harry Harlow. Now, how many of you have seen the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Have any of you seen that movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Yes. Oh, lots of you have seen it. It's a very Christian-oriented book as well. Lots of fun. You don't have to pay attention to the Christian, messages that it has in it. But in the movie, the very beginning of the movie, it's World War II, and it's in London. And they're taking the children and they're putting them on trains and saying goodbye to them, young children, and all the way up to teenagers. They're just pushing them onto a train and taking them out of London, and their parents are staying in London. And those children are going to orphanages out in the suburbs and out in the wilds of England, away from the big cities. Or if they're lucky, they're going to a relative. And if they're really lucky, they're going to a relative they know. And many times they're just going to a house where somebody has said, I could take 3 or 4 children in, and that's exactly what happened in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. They didn't really know this person, but he had opened up his house to them to take in some children. And that actually happened. That is real. That wasn't just movie theater, Hollywood magic. That actually happened. They sent the children out of London because London was being bombed, and they needed the adults there to run everything in London. So they just put them on the trains and sent them out into the wilderness. And Bowlby was a psychologist in England during that time and studied these children in the orphanages and said they were like deer in the headlights. They were like, the poor things had lost their connection to the person that they had attached to. They were now insecurely attached. There are two ways to be attached. Everyone's attached. They're either insecurely attached or securely attached. And hopefully you learn secure attachment within the first 4 years of your life, and then maybe your parents get divorced and you become insecurely attached, but you know what secure attachment feels like, and you can redevelop that secure attachment to somebody else, or re-access that particular attachment to your particular parent that you're going to stay with. And you might go back and forth between them. That's hard to do. But I was 21 when my parents got divorced, and it still affected me. And anybody who's been divorced in a divorced family, all the children, no matter how old the children are, it affects the child. And even as adults, my grades in college went from A and B to C and D. I didn't know why. I just thought college got harder, but it had nothing to do with that. Later in life, I found that out going back to college and getting straight A's. But it was because the rock of my life had been broken and destroyed, the family. And I needed to talk to somebody, and anyone who's gone through divorce, any child who's gone through divorce needs to talk to somebody to get through that. Or it's going to take a long time for them to do so and affect their life in that process. But that's attachment. And attachment, lots of scientists had their hands in attachment. Harry Harlow in the United States is one of the best known because of his experiments with rhesus monkeys. And what we find out is something called separation anxiety based on attachment. Now, if a child is brought into a laboratory with their attachment figure. Now, in the old days, it was the mother. Mothers always stayed home, but today, the attachment figure can be almost anybody because the mother and the father are both working, and grandparents are the #1 caregivers in the United States. Mothers and fathers are both working, and grandparents have retired in most cases, and so they are taking care of the children. So if you're in a laboratory as a child with your attachment figure, which could be anybody, I'll just say mom right now, but you're there with your mom, and you can watch that child to see how much they will refer back to their mother, back and forth, as they play around in the room, and how far away they get like a satellite from their mom, getting further and further away. The further away they can go and the less they refer back to the mom, the more attached they are. They're connected to that mom. When the mom leaves the room, if there are ways to judge the electrodes on the child's body, we can see their temperature drop, we can see their heartbeat go up. They show anxiety because their mom, their attachment figure, left the room. When their mom comes back into the room, how they react to their mom shows us how secure or insecurely they are attached to their mother. We'll talk about that in a second. If a stranger comes into the room with their mom in the room, they will have a lower temperature, body temperature. If they are alone in the room, their mom has left, and a stranger walks in, you see a drastic drop in their temperature because there's separation anxiety that exists. So everyone is attached. As I said, we're all attached, but some people are attached well and some people not so well. So secure attachment and insecure attachment. But the insecure attachment comes in two different types: anxious ambivalent or avoidant. So when the mother comes back into the room that an insecurely attached child is in, the insecurely attached child can just avoid contact with the mom. Doesn't want to do anything. I don't want you. You just left me. I'm like they're mad, right? You left me. And they avoid their attached figure, insecurely attached figure. Or they go up to them and bite them or kick them, or they're anxious ambivalent children. And the anxious ambivalent, the anxious ambivalent type is very different than the avoidant type. The avoidant type may have learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is a big deal in psychology, where a person attempts to connect. Nothing ever works. They can't connect to you, and they say, well, there's no use. I'm helpless in making this connection. The problem is that that connection, then, that learned helplessness extends to the rest of their life. And I'll probably give you this same example later, but if you take a pike, a fish called a pike, which loves to eat minnows, and you put it into a tank, an aquarium, and put a piece of glass in the middle of the aquarium and have minnows on one side and the pike on the other side, the pike will attempt to get to the minnows and hit its nose on the glass that's in between, again and again and again, sometimes so hard that it knocks itself out and it floats for a little bit before it wakes back up and tries again. Eventually, it just gives up. It's not going to try again. Take that piece of glass out and let the minnows swim in the whole aquarium. And the minnows will be swimming around that pike's mouth and swimming around and actually taking stuff off of its face, its sides. And that pike will starve to death. It will not attempt to eat those minnows. It has learned it is helpless. And even in this new situation, it is helpless. And the same thing happens to human beings. We have learned helplessness as a child, and then as an adult, we're a helpless adult. Now, there's a thing called imprinting, which is not the same as the attachment. Attachment can occur throughout life. So it's a sensitive period. You learn secure attachment, then you could be insecurely attached, then back again to secure attachment again later in life. It's really important to have secure attachment in the first 4 years, because if you don't, it's difficult to make connections later in life. But imprinting isn't a sensitive period, it's a critical period. And there's a difference between critical periods and sensitive periods. The critical period has to happen in this time frame. If a duck is born and does not have a figure to attach to, it will, within that specific time frame, it will never attach, and it will walk away from its nest and wander away and die because it can't be protected by its mom or fed by its mom. And that particular imprinting can occur on anything. So if the duck is hatched, also all the ducklings hatch. This doesn't happen, but it's an example. All the ducklings hatch, the mom is somewhere, who knows where, and a wolf comes by, or a fox comes by, or a coyote. Those ducklings will imprint on that animal and follow that animal. So that animal now has breakfast, lunch, and dinner following after it. It doesn't have to hunt. It just has to turn around, eat one, and then keep on going. And the other ones just keep on coming right behind. The man who studied this was Konrad Lorenz. Konrad Lorenz was born in 1903 and died in 1989. And you can see here a picture of him walking across a field with his little ducks following behind him. He raised these ducks from eggs, and when they hatched, he was the first person they saw, so he became mom. And there's a great video I have online of him. He has his little ducks in a box, and then there are 3 other mommy ducks, and those 3 other mommy ducks have their little babies with them, and those little babies have also been put in the box. So we have 4 groups of baby ducks in this box. The 3 other mama ducks are taken to north, east, and west, and Conrad is standing without a duck, just by himself, south of the box. The box is turned over so that all the ducklings are now in a big pile, and they're all just mashing around trying to get away from each other. And you see them separate and go right to their moms. The ducks in the north, the ducks in the east, ducks in the west, and his ducks to him in the south. And it's really cool that he is their mom. He is their mom. There's another picture, a video of him swimming, and his head is above the water, and the ducks are all behind him in a row behind him in the water. So it is a critical period, not a sensitive period. And most things in life for humans are sensitive periods, not critical periods, although the pure, well-developed form of a particular behavior may never occur. For instance, speaking occurs at about 13 years of age. If you have not learned to speak by 13 years of age, if you have not heard speaking and used speech, you will not be able to acquire speech after the age of 13. You will be able to learn words. This is a plate, this is a knife, this is a fork, but you won't be able to put them together properly in a sentence. You will not be able to communicate with language that way. And unfortunately, there are neglected children and abused children who every year we find some who are just so badly abused that they haven't learned to speak. Jeannie is the worst, and I have a link online about Jeannie. There is a girl in Ukraine also who she was picked up at 8 years of age, so she's learned to speak well, but you can still tell there's a problem with her. She actually grew up with dogs, and she barked. That was her communication. She barked, and she ran on 4 legs. She didn't run on 2 legs. And they found her and picked her up at 8, and she has developed into quite a normal human being, it appears. But if you're really close and watching her and listening to her, there's obviously something wrong. You can't really tell what. Maybe but people are very different, and so spectrum, she just may have been a little bit different. You don't know that she was raised by dogs. Oksana, I think is her name. I have a link in my lectures online for her. So Harry Harlow used surrogate mothers. He had lots of rhesus monkeys in his laboratory, and his laboratory, they were all sick. Every one of them was sick. They came to him sick, and he needed healthy rhesus monkeys. So he got his rhesus monkeys pregnant, the female ones, and took the babies away from their parents so that they would be isolated from the sickness. But by taking them away from their parents, he isolated them so that they could not become attached securely. They were insecurely attached. And they would attach to something that was completely different. And so when he recognized that there was something going on, they decided to do an experiment with these monkeys. And they gave them back their moms, but not their rhesus mom. They gave them back a stick with a wrapping around it that was either a nice, comfortable towel, cloth, or some wire, and the wire mother had a bottle of milk. So the food came from the wire mother. The other mother had nothing. It was just a cloth. And every single one of those rhesus monkeys chose the cloth mother to hang on to. It didn't matter that there was food on the other one. They would drag their cloth mother over, and they would drink from the other mother, but they would hold on to their cloth mother. And if you screwed down the cloth mother and the other one so that they couldn't drag them closer together, they ran screaming from their cloth mother over to the other mother, drank some, ran screaming back to their other mother and grabbed a hold of it. So this showed that contact comfort, which is what he called it, contact comfort is defined as the stimulation and reassurance derived from the touch of a caregiver. The reason why holding a child is very important, and stroking the child's head and looking right in the eyes of the child at a distance where they can concentrate and focus on you. At that distance, they can focus. So Harlow showed that contact comfort was more important than food. And contact comfort's important to remember in the child care industry as well. It has to be proper contact, but it's vitally important. And premature birth children, They need contact, comfort as well. You put a premature child into an isolate. The isolate is a cage, basically, that has all the proper oxygen, all the proper environment for that child to thrive. They're given all the nutrition they need, all the medication they need. They should thrive. They do not thrive unless you put your hands through those plastic gloves and you rub their heads and you rub their hands and you rub their feet and you talk to them so that they can hear you. That helps the premature child develop much faster than a child who does not get that. Another observation made by Harlow was that these babies never socialized. So once they were out of their particular situation, they'd grown up, they were placed into situations with other rhesus monkeys who had had their mothers with them, and they could not handle it. They didn't know how to communicate. They didn't know how to socialize with those other rhesus monkeys. They would sit in the corner of the cage, and they would shake back and forth and rock back and forth, and sometimes they'd bang their heads on the wall. And we see children that do this. We see children that are insecurely attached so badly that they perform the same function as the same behaviors as the rhesus monkeys in Harlow's experiments. A good book to read on this is Love at Goon Park. It's all about Harry Harlow and why he did these experiments and the need for these experiments, because every single magazine, women's magazine, was saying to women, don't touch your children, don't kiss your children, don't hug your children, because at that time in our country, in the United States, if you were 1 year old or less, and you went into an orphanage, there was a 100% chance that you would die. Every single child in the orphanage younger than 1 died. And it was because of germs. And we had no idea how to control them. Today, we know exactly how to control germs, and we hope that we'll be able to control this particular COVID germ very soon. But we know how to protect against it. Wash your hands, cover your mouth, stay away from other people who are coughing and sneezing. You know, it's quite obvious how to keep control of this particular germ. But back then, we had no idea what really germs were. And so there was a guy, Skinner, and we'll talk about him, who had a baby tender. It was sort of like the isolate. It was a box that he had created that had the right amount of atmosphere inside the box with a window in it. And he said, put your babies in there and don't touch your babies unless you have to. Obviously, you have to clean their diapers and give them food and wipe their faces and clean them when you do. But they should live in that particular little baby tender. But that baby tender was a place where you grew up. And his daughter grew up in that. He put his daughter in one of those, and his daughter grew up in there. And she's a perfectly normal, healthy artist. But it's really interesting to look at her art, because her art looks like, it looks like you're looking through a distorted glass. So it affected her and her art and the way she looks at the world. So attachment problems do indicate some possibility of future problems with social relationships. Yes, you can develop a secure attachment later, but if you have never developed a secure attachment in your childhood, it's going to be very difficult to develop one in your adulthood. And you may fall in love with somebody and be securely attached to that person, but they may not be securely attached to you and have no way of expressing what they feel about you because they can't get that connection that you easily give to them. But there are research projects that show that older adults can learn to become attached, securely attached, when they weren't and never had been securely attached. Next is Erikson. Erikson has a full theory that has 2 different sides, opposing states that you have to negotiate in life at different stages in your life. It's a very definite stage theory, and the first stage is 0 to 1, and the two different opposing stages are trust versus mistrust. You have to learn to trust at 1 year of age. How do you learn to trust at 1 year of age? Remember, you're crying as an infant, and those cries come in at least 4 different types. And if you're crying because your diaper is dirty and you need a diaper change, and your mom comes in and comforts you because she thinks that you are lonely, or feeds you because she thinks you're hungry and doesn't change your diaper, then how do you trust this human being to do what needs to be done? So a responsive parent is very important. A parent that responsively changes the diapers when they need to be changed and responds to the child's desires as the child is trying to indicate them, that relationship becomes very strong, and you can trust. If you never learn to trust, then you mistrust. And yes, you need to learn some mistrust as well. Stages have to be both stages, but you have to be on the positive side, the trust side, when you come out of this stage. But we need to mistrust also. But if you mistrust only, and you've never trusted another human being, how do you trust yourself? You've never learned trust. And so you can't trust. The next stage is the stage of independence or autonomy. You either are very independent, or you are very doubtful of yourself and feel more shame. And shame is a really negative thing. We don't want shame. We never want a child to feel shame. So the positive aspects of this, if parents encourage the child's use of initiative and reassure him or her when she makes mistakes, because all children make mistakes, the child to develop the confidence needed to cope with future situations that require their choice, control, and independence. And if parents are overprotective or disapproving of child's acts of independence, then the child has to decide that. You don't get to decide if you are poorly supporting their independence. You might think you're supporting their independence, but if they don't think so, then they're on that side. So they may feel ashamed of their own behavior and that they doubt their own abilities and they don't want to do things on their own. If a child draws on the wall, and every single one is going to at some point, then we yell and holler at them because they're not supposed to draw on the wall. But how do we know that they're getting that idea? They might think, well, it was an idea I had, and I did it, and now I guess I'm never going to do anything again. I'm not going to decide to do anything. I'm just going to sit here until somebody tells me to do something. And what we need to do is make sure they understand it's okay to draw. That's great. You drew on the wrong place, and now we're going to destroy your drawing because it's not allowed on the wall. But then we take them back to the drawing board, right, where you have paper and pencils and crayons, and this is the place where you draw. So we let them know that they will be okay if they draw, as long as they draw in the right place. Stage 3 is initiative versus guilt. Children have newfound powers at this stage as they have developed motor skills and become more and more engaged from 2 to 6 years of age in their world and with the people around them. They now must learn to achieve a balance between eagerness for more adventure and more responsibility, and learning to control impulses and childish fantasies. Guilt is wonderful, actually, compared to shame. Shame has no way out. When you shame a child, they are destroyed. When you guilt a child, guilt allows a way out. So how do you think George feels right? How would you feel right now if George had done that to you? Oh, I wouldn't feel very good. Well, that's right. Now, how would you get out of this? How do you make George feel better now that you know that he feels bad? You can go give him a present. You can say you're sorry, right? So Guilt allows a way out of the situation. But shame, when you just tell the child they're bad and there's no way out of it, that's terrible. So age 2 to 6, initiative versus guilt. 6 to 12, we're now in school and we're doing competence, the ability, we're competent of the things we do, or inferiority. School is a very important event at this stage, and children learn to make things, use tools, and acquire the skills to be a worker, because that's what we're teaching you in school, is how to be a worker in life, and the potential provider as well. And they do all these while making the transition from the world of home into the world of the peers. If children can discover pleasure in intellectual stimulation, then being productive and seeking success, they'll develop a sense of competence, and if not, they'll develop a sense of inferiority. This stage, stage 5, identity and role confusion, is the #1 stage for Erikson. And the reason is you are figuring out who you are. This is the time when you ask the questions, who am I? And to successfully answer the question, Erikson suggests the adults, the adolescent, must integrate the healthy resolution of all the earlier conflicts. Did we develop the basic sense of trust? Do we have a strong sense of independence and competence and feel in control of our lives? Adolescents who have successfully dealt with earlier conflicts are ready for this identity crisis. And he says this is the #1 stage that you have to get through. And of course he did, because his name is not Erik Erikson. He took on that name later in life, in his adolescence. So if you take my personality class, you'll find every theorist had something in their life, in their childhood, that distinguishes their particular theory. From 19 to 40, now we're getting well beyond any other theory. They all stop around 21. This is going way up into the adult years. Intimacy versus isolation. And then the next stage, 40 to 65, but generativity versus stagnation. Do you help the world, or do you stagnate and become very egocentric in this particular stage? And then 65 to death. If you have successfully navigated every single stage, then you'll be fine at death. You'll look at death without despair, with integrity. You'll be able to finalize all your relationships. You'll be able to finish all of the things that need to be done with paperwork, your wills, money, how you want your body to be taken care of. You want to be cremated or buried. Do you want to be buried in the ground or in a mausoleum? You can think about all those things successfully and get them all out of the way so that your relatives don't have to think about them when you die and fight over them when you die. If you have integrity, you can take care of it. If you have despair, no. And so he says, this is the final stage, and you have to have passed successfully through all the other stages in order to get here and successfully die. So his is the only one that goes from birth to death. Ego integrity is the ability to look back on your life without regrets and to enjoy a sense of wholeness. That doesn't mean you don't ever say, well, what if? I mean, I almost signed on the line to go into the Navy to become a pilot. And my mother said, you need to go back to school and get your master's degree, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do since I couldn't be a veterinarian. And I was thinking about the master's in psychology, but I hadn't actually made that decision yet. And the Navy wanted me. Wow, what would my life be like if I had gone into the Navy as a pilot? And yeah, but I'm very happy with where I am because the decisions I made led to a wonderful life where I met my wife and we were able to adopt a child and take care of 100 cats. I don't know how many cats we've ever had all through our time together. But my wife likes dogs. She likes poodles, the miniature poodles. She likes miniature poodles. And I like dogs. I like Shelties. So we have cats. It's called compromise. That's a marriage. Marriage is all about compromise. Life is all about compromise. For God's sakes, politics is all about compromise, people. Compromise. Selective social interaction is when you choose at the end of life to have certain friends because you just can't handle acquaintances anymore. You don't have enough time for acquaintances. You need real friends. And when you get into developmental psychology, for a class, you find out that you need 4 good friends at the end of life. People who have 4 very good friends at the very end of life live longer than people who have less. Of course, you can have more than that, but we usually don't. We find those people who we can trust and who will help us and who we will help. Most of us have fair weather friends or Facebook friends. We call them friends. They're just acquaintances. We never met them. We talk to them online, but that's about it. We don't really know much about them because they can lie. They can say anything they want to on Facebook. We don't really know who they are until we meet them and see their body posture, their tone of voice, their facial expressions. That's how we know a person and get to know a person. So we have fair weather friends. They're there when everything's good, and when everything goes bad, they're gone. They're not there to help. That's the end of the class for today. We're almost at the end of this section. We'll start memory next section as well as finishing up this one. But remember, there's also language, and I want you to go through the language one by yourselves. It's best to go out and listen to the language one online. So I will talk to you guys later. Have a good day, and I'll see you on Thursday. And if you want to talk to me, come on and talk. If you haven't typed in that you're here, make sure you type in that you're here. Stay healthy.